Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a hotter sex life, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, solid friendships, a powerful legacy. Find out how good you can have it on this episode of Man Alive. Head over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power that accelerates your career and solidifies your confidence with women.
I'm excited to be here today to interview an incredible man who is having a powerful impact on the world in the realm of leadership. And I would say having an impact through both his head and his heart. And I don't often see, I think more and more these days, there are leaders who are doing this, but I don't often see leaders who are so strong in business and have such a deep spirit and heart. So welcome, Eric Kaufman. Thank you so much for being here today with us.
Thank you, Shayna, for inviting me. And that's really cool, beautiful words. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I was introduced to Eric through some friends and colleagues and attended a book talk for his book, The 4 Virtues of Leadership, which I found profound in the way that it blends the leadership of business and spirit, or you could say business and humanness and the path of growth, which I'm moved by. And I believe it's one of the things that many of us are motivated by in life. So I want to give Eric a quick introduction and then we'll dive in to the realm of leadership in relationship and leadership in life. We're gonna take it beyond business. So Eric's diverse and varied life is a commitment to understanding and teaching wisdom. And his published book, The 4 Virtues of a Leader, shares practical ideas and tools that deepen a leader's ability to be efficient, effective, and deliberate, and a leader who people are drawn to follow. The crucible of Eric's journey and, hearing about this at your book talk was amazing. The life you've lived is really incredible, from living in a cabin that you built on your own, in meditation for a year, to being in Israel and being in South Africa, being a master scuba diving instructor. So, he's also done 16 years of leadership consulting and management at Fortune 100 firms, has a degree in business psychology, and a quarter century of practicing Zen practice. So really, Eric, you are a Renaissance man, to be honest, in the range of experience that you've had in life.
Thank you. It was not an intentional effort to do all those things.
Right.
Well, it was intentional to do it. I didn't necessarily set out a plan. I'll do this and this and this to be diverse. I think I love the exploration, and I love the discovery, and I love that I can then turn around and share those. So it just made sense to continue to check out the edge, right? Where's the edge? Yeah.
And I loved that about your book too, that one of the most important things, or one of the things you brought up a lot, was, that being a leader is about being in service. And I'm interested today in talking about being a leader in life and what impact that can have on one's life, and creating relationships that are fulfilling, and, romantic, friendship, family, all of that. And I want to just give a little caveat. I mean, I tend to work with heterosexual men in the realm of relationship, and I believe, especially with your work, of course, it applies across gender and sexual preference, and I'm going to do my best not to generalize or genderize, but I also want to gear some of this toward the men I work with. And what I've often found is that the same things that have a woman trust and desire a man are often the same things that have colleagues listen to and respect and admire him. And so when I saw you speak, I really started thinking about this idea of leadership in life and relationship. And you talk a lot about fear in the book too. So we'll get into this, but I see a lot of people, especially in romantic relationships stopping out of fear. And so then I started to think, oh, well, what if someone took on this context of being a leader in their own lives? And so, yeah, I'm really excited to look at the 4 virtues of leadership in the realm of relationships.
And I think where our paths sort of naturally intermingle, Shayna, is that when I talk about leadership, when I teach leadership programs, I talk about leadership as a relational competency.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you and I have talked about that, but I really that's the language I've used for many years. It's a relational competency because here's a very short litmus test, right? If you're walking down the street and nobody's following you, you're just out for a stroll, right? There's no leadership happening, and so leadership is very much a relational competency. And I think many of the things that you might delve into in terms of leadership have to do with trust and integrity and intentionality and safety and a sense of mutual fate and respect. I mean, many of these things are relational competencies, right? And even power dynamics and control elements. I mean, those are sort of rich realms of leadership as they are in any relationship.
Yeah, beautiful. So I guess I'm wondering, to get us started, I think what I'd love is for you to share a little bit of what inspired you to write this book, and then also include a little bit of how this applies to your personal and relational life beyond, just the business piece, how you see it impacting your life.
So I wrote the book to help navigate through a gap that happens in life. And that gap that I see, there's a gap between envisioning something and executing something, right? There's a gap between thinking about something and then taking the action, hopefully the skilled action required to make that vision, that thought manifest, real. Which in many ways to me is leadership, right? It's the idea to, here's a vision. And it doesn't just have to be the CEO of the business. It can be a director, you can be a supervisor, you can be a team lead, you can be a team member without a title.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something I see that I would like to be able to accomplish. And then there's the energy, effort, time, and collaboration required to bring that into manifest experience, right? And in that gap, it's not just time and money and resources. There's skills you need. There's visioning, there's planning, there's problem solving, managing change, team building. But what brings all that to life is really energy. I think energy is the name of the game. Energy is the fundamental essence of all existence. And in particular, I think closing that gap is this energy of the leader. So in addition to resources, in addition to skills, what I really wanted to address, what I was seeing that was often not addressed, but making such a critical difference between achieving meaningful results and not, is how do you evoke and feed this leadership energy?
Mm-hmm.
And so these 4 virtues were things that I saw consistently in people across domains, right? So this is spiritual leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, community leaders. This is the way that they can cultivate their energy in order to harness and cultivate, the resources and the people and the skills in order to form the relationship to move the ideas from concept to reality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of what's underneath the competencies, the skills, and the resources. It's the
right. Okay. So, and is that what you mean by energy too? Is beneath the skills and the competencies, there's something in a being, there's something in the way a person acts that will either motivate and inspire, or it won't. Right? Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about energy?
Exactly. And I think motivate and inspire is really one dimension, and it's one that a lot of people focus on. But I think the dimension that's, quite frankly, equally as important is not just motivate and inspire, but also create safety, trust, and emotional commitment. Which maybe is what you mean by motivate and inspire. But sometimes I think motivate and inspire is considered sort of flash energy and excitement. And I think that beyond the excitement, there's also got to be integrity and trust.
Yeah, well, and that's inspiring actually to hear you even say that, right? The safety, trust, and emotional commitment, and that applies so much in relationship too, that it's not just the inspiration or that flash of a moment, but what actually sustains, commitment and connection and all of that. So that's exciting to dive into that part too.
Yeah, and we'll come back to it, I'm sure. But I have, a quarter of the book is dedicated to the question: what am I sustaining?
Right.
How do we develop this? How do we cultivate and sustain our ability to be persevering and gritty?
Yeah. Yeah. So what have you found, maybe a short example of in your own personal life, whether it's with your wife or your daughters or, just being out in the world in relationships? Is there something that stands out for you as to how this book applies in that realm?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it applies in every realm. I was, this morning I was presenting to a group that is, typically my groups are leadership groups, and I had an owner of a business ask me to come in and present to his, I think 50, these are managers and supervisors, and so they weren't the senior managers, right? This was sort of the middle management and even the frontline management, and so I specifically focused on these qualities, these virtues, not just from a VP or director or C level, but just as a human being. And man, people were completely engaged by the notion of these 4 virtues, right? The first virtue says, what am I creating? And it's really about self-awareness and self-responsibility. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is an essential to me part of relationship. And maybe we can get into it. I tell a story there about learning, particularly about relationship, how that applies to this notion of focus or what am I creating? The second part is around courage. And a lot of the conversation is really about the fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of looking stupid, right? These are very relational fears. Yes. We're talking about people who are, walking, constructing bridges or hunting elephants. We're talking about sort of the day-to-day stuff. So there's a real application of cultivating courage in the face of the social and relational fears, which are the predominant fears. And certainly the same thing with grit and perseverance, and ultimately with the fourth virtue of faith, which is the idea of surrender and letting go, which is perhaps the most challenging of all, which is this capacity to let go. But in relationship might very well be the turning point, right? You can be intentional and you can be aware and you can be courageous and you can be persistent, but if you can't surrender and if you can't drop the shield, the relationship is governed and limited by the thickness of your shield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's just reminding me, I'm like, do I go here now or do we wait of the end of your book and how, you describe, which I think this is just such an incredible metaphor of the life and growth of a crab. And you could probably say this better than I can. Maybe do you want to tell the story of that or the kind of impact of that, and I'll add what I took away from it.
Sure. Yeah, sure. The short version of it is that, crabs are exoskeletons. So, humans are endoskeletons. We have the hard parts, the bones are inside. The crab exoskeleton, the hard parts on the outside. And it serves two functions, right? Their skeleton, their shell. It both holds them together, quite frankly, right? With the shell that would just fall apart, so to speak. And it also protects them, right? It's the hard shell that makes it hard for other animals to eat them or attack them. But the crab has to grow. And if you're stuck inside of a hard shell, how do you do that? So what they do is essentially they molt. They have to shed their shell. And they do that by literally sticking themselves between two rocks and then ingesting a huge amount of water and then inflating themselves to the point where they pop. There's these special seams in the shell. And so they pop the seams, the shell pops open, and they crawl out backwards from the shell. The shell just sort of drifts off in the current and often ends up on the beach when you see these empty crab shells. Mm-hmm. And now in that moment, that crab is classically a soft shell crab, which makes it a delicacy, not just for people, but for sort of any animal in the ocean, they're incredibly vulnerable.
Incredibly vulnerable, yeah.
Incredibly vulnerable. But also what's happened is that they've just grown, 10, 15, 20%. Literally, physically, they've swelled. And they need to hang out for a little while to let that bigger, now soft shell, eventually, it takes a couple of weeks, sort of harden into its new dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And what's important about it is a couple of things, right? One is, what you said, they grow. If you want to grow, you got to get out of your shell. That's the one.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that the shells often accumulate these parasitic parasites that attach themselves. And so when they ditch the shell, they're ditching those parasitic attachments.
Right.
And the other part, which I think is fascinating, is that it's the only time that they can then procreate. It's the only time that they can actually put out their, however crabs procreate, right?
Their sexual organs. And
they broadcast the sperm and they broadcast the eggs, but they can only do it when they're out of that hard shell. And so there's, you can take it from here, but there's some pretty obvious ramifications, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's so amazing. As I was reading it first, just even that thought of, what are the shells that we carry around and how do we protect ourselves? And especially in the realm of relationship, having been in my own relationships and worked with thousands of people at this point, there's really that such a clear, it's so clear how much we are trying to protect ourselves and how scary it can be to be vulnerable and put ourselves out there in the world. And yet also how much it takes that to have connection. And when I read that when the crabs actually, lose their protective shell is the only time that they can actually mate with each other, I just was like, this wild revelation. And then I think the other piece too that you talk about in the book, where on the journey, I think you call it, of the journey to find the pearl. Is that what you said? Or the pearl of wisdom?
Pearl of great wisdom, yeah.
Yeah, the pearl of great wisdom, and that we actually do have to, I'm probably mixing so many metaphors, but we'll clarify, but that you have to let go of attachments along the way and ideas about, what relationship is, or what it's going to suck out of us or take from us, or that it will be hard. And so, where do we want to dive in here? I mean, one of the things that I notice when men often come to me with a lot of fear, and specifically a fear of rejection. And so, like you said, the virtue of courage, this comes into play, but I think it also comes into play with focus and grit and faith and letting go. So then I'm wondering, can we apply your virtues to this struggle and to the way relationship in particular can bring up these kinds of fears, and the fear of putting ourselves out there and having someone say no, and all the meaning we make of that?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, fear is the essential mood of the ego. And by ego, I mean by ego, I really mean our identity, our sense of an intact and distinct self that really emerges when we're infants, is hatched on the premise of insufficiency and vulnerability. So I have two children. I've watched this up close. I don't have a clear memory of myself going through it when I was, 6 months old or 9 months old or a year. But, as they grow, they begin to notice difference and distinction and what we call object permanence, right? The babies, it's a major learning milestone to recognize that, when babies are real small, you can play peekaboo, you cover your face and then you uncover your face and you go peekaboo, and they get blown away every time because they don't have this object permanence notion down.
Yes. Yeah.
And so as soon as we learn object permanence, we really clarify on the me thou, right? There's me and there's not me. And no sooner do we discover there's me, not me, we discover I can't satisfy myself. I can't feed myself. I can't clean myself. I can't burp myself. And now there's suddenly this sense of dependence. And to the degree that, whatever our childhood was, we have greater or lesser sort of imprints of sufficiency and dependency. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to be super psychological, but it's important, right?
Yeah.
Because what then forms is, we're forming an identity, and that identity is the way that we deal with this sense of vulnerability in the world.
Yeah.
And then we develop these patterns and habits, right? So my pattern was, I have a native knack for intelligence, so I kind of developed the ego identity around being the smart guy.
Mm-hmm.
My brother is inherently affable, right? So he really developed this identity that's around the socializer. I have another brother who's very exacting. So his comes around sort of, the organizer and so on and so on and so on. But underneath all that is fear.
Yeah.
Fear of ultimately annihilation. It's not just vulnerability. It's that we're going to be wiped out. And so it's from that position that we enter into a relationship, which is, remarkably
amazing that we enter into a relationship.
It's a hell of a freaking proposition, isn't it? I mean, because it's two humans entering it, both saying, don't hurt me.
Right.
Not to the other person, but to the universe, to life. Yeah. And then it manifests in each person. So fear is the basic mood of the ego. And that's where we start from. And that's where we have to relate from. Mm-hmm. So courage, and we can talk more about it, but, I just kind of wanted to share that because it doesn't make somebody a freak that they have anxiety or fear.
Right. I think that's so important, right? To recognize that, for you listening, that fear of rejection, whether you're single and out there trying to date or have a partner, or whether you're in relationship and you've been in a relationship for decades, right? That fear does not make you unique or does not make you weak or bad or wrong or any of that. I still find it comes up in my relationship, my romantic relationship, asking for what I want or saying that I want something or need something. It's just so human and so common. And I really like to particularly look at, how do we create connection through our fears and through our concerns versus trying to get rid of them to be in connection.
Yeah, and how do we allow ourselves to transcend that shield or that veil? Yeah. I'll share a recent story from me, a relatively recent story. Yeah. 5 years ago. I've been a member of the San Diego Zen Center for a long time, and about 10 years into it, I remember going to teacher. About 10 years into it, I started feeling like, Mama, I don't know if I should still practice here. I don't know if this is my place. I don't feel like I belong. Maybe I've outgrown it. Maybe the teachers aren't the right teachers for me anymore, and so forth. And it's it's not the first time I've switched teachers, right? That's not unusual in life. But I had a pretty close connection with the teachers, and so I went over to talk to Ezra, one of the teachers there, and kind of annoyed that I think they didn't know me as well as they should have known me. Mm-hmm. So I go into Daisan. Daisan is the sort of the Zen term for an interview with a teacher, right? And we have these every Wednesday and Thursday, whatever. And I said something like, Ezra, I'm frustrated. I'm feeling like I might have run the course on practicing here. And so he looked at me and he said, well, why? And I said, well, you just don't know me to the level I think you should, which, by the way, is a horrible thing to say to a Zen teacher. There's a whole host of mistakes in there. But that aside, I said, I don't think you know me to the level that I think you should. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of looked at me for a second and he said, well, have you let us know you to the level you think we should? Mm. And it's part of what I love about Zen practice, right? The simplicity of it. And he put it back on me. He said, if you're not known, are you making yourself known? Mm-hmm. And it was really helpful because I kind of went back to my cushion and reflected some more. And not only how am I limiting them from knowing me, how am I limiting others, right? I was holding back because I wanted to edit myself, right? So I can sound good, so I can look good, so I can have the teachers see me in a way that was flattering to me in my mind and make me desirable, that they think I'm a good student. I was still playing that game.
Yeah.
And so, owning that, recognizing that, and doing something about it, I think that's part of relationship.
Yeah, and I love a couple of things. That you can see it as a game, right? There's this game of, well, if I if I present myself in a way that I have it together, or, if I don't show certain parts of myself, it can seem safer, right? Or that people will want to be closer to us or love us more. But, I think one of the heartbreaks of that is that we actually don't then get to be loved for who we really are. And then there's this constant, I know we could talk about this in spiritual terms too, and this kind of transcending the ego, but I think there is this, this fear that I've seen in so many people of, well, if eventually somebody finds out this thing about me, he or she won't love me anymore. And so I really do see it as courage, like you talk about, the courage of showing ourselves and the courage of bringing ourselves, again, whether it's to a first date or to a long-term relationship. And I think both are hard in their own way. I've seen a lot of people who are dating say, well, I can't show this part of me because, at some point, I can't show this part of me because then someone won't even want to get to know me. And then in long-term relationship, well, I can't show this part of me because this person's already been with me for all these years. And if I bring up this part, then it's going to ruin everything. And, how do we have the courage to actually to show ourselves, like you're saying?
Well, and I think what I've grappled with and is, do I first establish a level of safety and trust in the exchange that I can show myself?
Mm-hmm.
Or do I first show myself in order to create, safety and trust in the relationship?
Right.
And the question might be sort of a false dichotomy, right? It may not be first and second, but there certainly is something to it. I know that when I met my Shayna.
Right. Your wife's name is Shayna, we should clarify.
My wife's name is Shayna, right? So yeah, it's always fun to meet another Shayna, right?
Yeah.
But when I met Shayna, I was in a place where I decided I am going to literally hang everything on the outside. This was a time where I was really committed to it. I wanted to be married. I was 32 or 33 years old, and I had this real clear revelation: I'm getting married. And so every woman that I interacted with, I was like, here it is, and
no pressure.
yeah, no, well, here it is, and I'll show you mine, you show me yours, right? Because that's what really happens, sort of dynamically.
Mm-hmm.
So when I met Shane, I was like, here it is. I honestly sort of held, as far as I could tell, nothing back. Maybe I was holding stuff back, but I couldn't tell you what it was. It was it would have to be so subtle that even I didn't get it, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't run away. And actually, none of the women that I was sort of doing that with ran away. What it did was it remarkably accelerated the exchange.
Yeah.
I showed up and I said, here it is. This is me, good, bad, and the ugly.
Yep.
And actually, I found it to be a little confusing to do it, quite frankly, because the intensity of the intimacy that produced and the speed and the intensity, I was unprepared for.
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, it does. To me, it happens. The more you show and the more someone else shows and the more you actually go to those deeper levels and deeper places, the more the intimacy, grows and fosters.
Yeah, it was actually kind of trippy. I just decided I was going to, be completely self-revealing. I did that, and almost like, within an hour or two, with almost every woman, I was having these really intimate, intense experiences.
Uh-huh.
Actually, to the point where after a couple months of doing that, I had to back off.
Mm-hmm.
It was too much. It was too much. There were too many women I was now having these intense relationships with, and it was like, okay, only one of them is going to end up being my wife. And I just didn't. I needed to sort of circle back and think, how do I do this more more narrowly, I guess.
Mm-hmm, or more intentionally or something. So there was intention there, but it is, we could dive into a whole nother level of conversation there around how it actually, I'm not going to say it's easy to create intimacy, but I think there's a lot of, in the ways that we protect ourselves and shield ourselves and try to accommodate other people's needs and desires, that we block intimacy And then it sounds like you had the experience of, okay, if I really show up and I show myself and I'm honest and I'm forthcoming, intimacy happens. And I think, a lot of people experience over time relationship fading and fizzling. And I tend to see that people have lost that courage to show themselves or to show up or to say, hey, this thing hurt me, or this is what I want in relationship. This is where I want to grow. And that intimacy fades, because of that, or because we kind of box each other in and think we know each other and start to see, oh, well, that's you and your shell over there, and here's me and my shell over here. And I guess this is just how we're going to be,
Well, and I think I totally recognize that. I mean, in my life and in my work, and I think that the word intimate, I think, comes from some Latin derivation. I'm going to go with intimus. We can always do the fact checking later. or no, this is modern America. We don't fact check. So it comes from intimus. Sorry.
I'm not gonna respond to that one.
Right. So intimacy comes from the Latin word intimus, and I think it means like inmost or innermost, and that's really what intimacy is about having access to that inner sanctum, right? That innermost aspect of the self, and that means I'm safe. I trust you not to violate that inner sanctum. But I think where the analogy might fall apart is that, we think of an inner temple as some kind of a stone structure that's permanent, while humans are a dynamic experience. We're an animal that continues to evolve, not just sort of physically, but socially, emotionally, and spiritually. Mm-hmm. And so what might have been intimate with somebody 20 years ago, to your point, might look incredibly routine and distant now because people have changed. And when I see, we're at the point where many of the couples in our circle are starting to, enter into divorce state. Mm-hmm. In the 15, 18, 20-year range, it's not uncommon. Yeah. Even 25 and 30 years. There's no necessarily number on it, but he'll say she's just not the person I married, or she'll say he's not growing in the same way that I'm growing. But I think they've lost intimacy. They've lost connection with the innermost aspect of that dynamic, evolving person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious too. You've mentioned safety a couple times, and we're still in the realm of fear. And so I guess I'm curious, especially in the context of leadership in life and relationship, if you have any suggestions for how to meet fear, or I see safety as something both that is in our environment, but also that we create inside of ourselves. People have a different sense of, oh, well, if I share that and this person rejects me, then somehow I'm not safe, versus, for me, I still feel pretty safe inside if that happens. So yeah, I'm curious about fear and about safety and how you would apply your leadership principles or virtues to that, to support someone to create more connection through those.
So the first aspect for cultivating courage, in my experience, is not an action but an awareness. And I think that what's been successful for me and for many other people has been to first develop an awareness of my quote unquote fear response. Mm-hmm. Right. So what does it look like when I get frightened, when I get scared, when I'm going into, I think to use the word we've been using, into protection mode, because that's really what fear is about. It's protection. Yeah. So what does my protection profile look like? Is it, that I get busy? Is it that I withdraw sexually? Is it that I get more aggressive? Do I get more supplicating and pleasing? Do I, get real engaged in logistics and tactical issues and not discuss meaningful issues? Mm-hmm. We each have sort of, our protection profile, the way that we behave when we're in this protection mode. And I think that I find that developing an awareness about that. So what is it? How am I behaving? Mm-hmm. That's the first layer. And And then, that behavior is emanating from what I call belief thoughts. There's these clusters of beliefs that are looking to be protected, right? So, you talked a lot about fear of rejection, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's fear of rejection, and my partner is really starting to hang out a lot with other people.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't actually mean anything other than my partner is hanging out with other people. But from a lens of fear of rejection, I could start saying, well, she's hanging out with others. Maybe I'm just not satisfying her anymore. She needs more emotional or physical or social attention. Okay, I see where this is going. She's eventually going to walk away because I'm not enough. We start going down the storyline, right? These are belief thoughts.
Yeah.
And again, at this point, there's nothing to do but to be aware.
Mm.
Because in the absence of awareness, how do you take proper action, right? If I go to the doctor and I say I don't feel well, he's going to, or she is going to, my doctor is a she, would spend significant time assessing what's going on with me. There's blood tests, there's, more sort of invasive tests, there's genetic tests, there's all kinds of ways of diagnosing what's going on before the doc will say, hey, this is what I think is going on, that's what we should do.
Right. And I just thought, though, if you go in and you don't say, it's my stomach that's bothering me or it's my head that's bothering me, they could do all these invasive tests in a completely wrong domain, right? Or you could take action in a way that's not effective or not useful if you're not actually starting with this awareness.
Right. So you got exactly. So you hone in, right? So I'm in. Instead of fear, we can call it. I'm in protective mode.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the protective mode has been triggered by some perception of danger. The perception of danger is a mix of actual environmental cues. I don't know. Maybe that's 10%, 20%, and then a huge internal story that is mostly drawing on ancient patterns of thought. I mean, when you were a child, when your mom and dad did what they did, when your brothers and sisters did what they did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyone who's 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years old is so profoundly outdated in terms of those beliefs, but they're so ingrained.
Yeah.
Right? So the first stage is, what is my protection profile? What does it look like when I get protected? Then what are my belief thoughts? And then it becomes a matter of, the third thing is still not action in my world. But now it gets somatic. So if this is my behavior and these are my beliefs, what does it feel like in my body? Because now we're getting down to a level of truth that transcends our intellectual discursive thinking.
Yeah.
Right? There's a truth in the body that is clean and pure.
Yeah.
And so what's it like in my body? What's happening in my chest? What's happening in my shoulders? What's happening in my mouth? What's happening in my stomach, the solar plexus, my low back? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The heat, the pressure, the tension, because that's the physical manifestation of our protective behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's such an important part that often gets ignored under more psychological approaches.
Yeah.
But once we get into the body, because that's where it's playing out.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when I'm in protection, it's because I feel this sickening feeling in my gut because she's playing with all these other people. I don't want to deal with that physical discomfort, so I'm just going to push away from her in order to not feel my discomfort.
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it makes a ton of sense to me. And that's a lot of the way that I work with my clients is to actually get into those physical sensations and in some ways to have, so I'm curious about this for you too, but, I work with people to have the courage to actually feel those feelings because I think our minds can be a protection from feeling the intensity of sensation in our body that can feel like, oh my God, I'm going to die if I actually feel this, or this feels horrible. So yeah, I'm curious how you work with that with people too.
I mean, it sounds like we're doing some very similar work, Shannon, and I actually really love the term you use because I use the same term, the courage to feel into your body. But you see, we've now already are talking about courage.
Yeah.
So at some level, it doesn't have to be any more sophisticated or challenging than that, because that's pretty challenging and sophisticated in itself.
Right.
If I can notice what's happening, track, my physical sensations, track my thought, my belief thoughts, I now have real content to work with.
Right. And choice.
Mm-hmm. And choice. And so to me, so then if I say, okay, she's doing this, I'm physically feeling this, I'm mentally thinking this, now I can give it a name, right? The name could be rejection, it could be failure, it could be humiliation,
Mhm.
It could be I'm unlovable, right? There's a variety of things that are our story.
Yeah.
And then the choice to me is, okay, what does 10% look like? What does it look like to move 10% into the territory that you're retreating from?
Mm.
Because protection is a shutting down, right?
Right.
We get even an aggressive version of protection is still a shutting down,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because somebody could shut down and look very aggressive.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? We either kind of get aggressive or we pull away.
Right. Either one, those are withdrawals.
Yep.
So so then I don't say conquer it or destroy it or eliminate it. I say, great. What is 10% look like to move toward what you'd rather run away from?
Mm-hmm.
And that toward, in the context of our conversation, is intimacy.
Yeah.
So what does 10% of showing my soft belly look like in this moment?
Mm.
You know, and that could be a request,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't just have to be that I'm doing it. It could be a request. It could be that, you know, this is what I need.
Yeah.
But I think examining where that request is coming from is pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and I love this. And I think I'm just remembering, certain examples in my own relationships where I actually started calling it one of the ways that I work with myself, riding the dragon, because at first it would be like this fierce fire would come up from my belly and I would, and I would react and I would have all these emotions or I would yell or whatever. And then when I actually started imagining, it'd be really bizarre, but I started imagining myself kind of riding this dragon as it came up from my belly out my mouth, and that I had reins on it, and I was willing to feel that fire and that burning and that sense of whether it was worthlessness or fear of being abandoned or all of that, that I actually just let myself feel it, that I had the courage to feel it, like you're saying, before I would actually, and then I would choose to respond as opposed to just having that be that immediate reaction. And I love what you're saying about, what is it like to choose 10% more intimacy or 10% more of that vulnerability or showing your underbelly. I think that's a beautiful way to see it.
Yeah, and I love the riding the dragon. In the book I write it at, there's a three-step or three-part component to this courage exercise, and I talk about feel, face, and embrace.
Mm-hmm.
And feel, and each one of them is actually an act of courage in itself. So it's not like when you do these, by the end you will have courage. Mm-hmm. Every one of those pieces is an act of courage, and it aggregates and grows. And so feel is just what we talked about, right? What's happening physically, because much of what we are attempting to withdraw from in fear situations is not just the danger around us, but the incredible discomfort within us.
Yeah.
Right? And the dragon, that fire rising up from your gut, that's not the fire of desire or pleasure or power. That's a fire that seems like it's burning and acidic and hurtful.
Yeah. Yeah.
But willing to be present to that, that's an act of courage, a massive act of courage, right? Mm. And so you feel, then face it is to say, great, if I'm feeling it, then let me orient towards it, face it. And now that I see it, what is it? I can label it. I can name it. And if I can name it, I can begin to tame it. Mm-hmm. Right? And then the third part is embrace, which is move towards it openly in such a way that you're beginning to have more of a connection with it rather than a greater disconnection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking of it in terms of for people who are single too and out there in the world. And sometimes those sensations are so strong that they're paralyzing.
Well, it feels like we're going to die.
Right.
It's totally paralyzing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's and so if we have to kind of fight, flight, freeze, mm-hmm. right? Some people get aggressive, some people withdraw, and some people kind of, just freeze.
Yeah.
Get paralyzed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love talking about it with people who are out there dating. And I often find that there's this, it's funny. It's like in the dating world or the dating game, people have to show up as brave and bold and beautiful, all of these things. And that we can't actually show or say, oh, I'm nervous, or, oh, I forgot what I was going to say because I looked at you and I was so drawn to you or attracted to you that I kind of just lost my mind,
I
And
love it. Yeah.
yeah, and that actually, I think, we take ourselves so seriously, and then we have to be this good person or this attractive person or something. And I think it's an act of courage too, to be able to say, wow, I mean, first to make it okay within ourselves. I'm not bad, weak, wrong, horrible, anything, because I'm having these feelings inside of me, that this is so human. And
Right.
then, wow, could I actually admit this to someone? Instead of trying to hide it. Because then I think when we try to hide it, we get all, in a tumult inside. And then again, we're trying to put up this facade, and that's back to that protective shell or that protective layer.
Yeah. And when that protective layer is on, it's a guaranteed way to have a very limited relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I can give you a sort of a very current example. My youngest daughter is just turned 14, and she's this awesome, beautiful girl, and at 14, she's doing sort of what nature is designing her to do, which is preparing her independence.
Uh-huh.
But every time she does her thing, which her thing includes some kind of a rejection of me or pushing me away or just asserting her own power, she asserts her power by sort of cutting, creating space, essentially, which is perfect. It's preparing her to own her own space. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Conceptually.
Conceptually, right.
But every time she does that, my heart pinches.
Yeah.
And I get, and my sort of pattern is, the hurt of the rejection. And then because it's not that palatable to me to feel the hurt, I go to anger.
Mm-hmm.
Because anger feels more powerful to me than hurt.
Yeah.
But really what's happening is when she does her sort of teenage girl thing to assert her own power in space, which it means sort of pushing me to the side, it's more about her than me, but I'm still vulnerable in that way, and I feel that pinch in my heart and then the heat in my gut.
Yeah.
And I work with that, fortunately for me, daily.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great learning opportunity, but
yeah, it's a good perspective. It is.
Yeah.
It's a great learning opportunity, and it hurts. And
it hurts.
Uh-huh.
It literally hurts.
Yeah.
And I can do things like say to her, okay, hey, you're being hurtful and disrespectful, and that would be true, but okay, that's my stuff.
Yeah.
So kind of finding the balance between what do I want to share with her and what's just mine to process.
Yeah.
And that's true with my daughter, with my wife, with both my daughters, with everybody I interact with, right? What's mine to share and mine to process, one. And two, how can I get out of mine, and look at us and our, and what does service look like, right? What does compassion look like? What does caring for another look like? Because ultimately it's all about me if I don't do that.
And I love that, where you're going from the me to being in service, right? So a lot of men come to me and they see women out there, and women can sometimes have a coldness or a protection, and, they've been hurt in the past and they're kind of suspicious, and not all, of course, but, this happens. And I love that you said, with your daughter, you can recognize, oh, it's not as much about me. It's really, so much about her and her feeling her own power. And I think for a lot of people in the world, like you said, we feel our own power by getting bigger or puffing up or creating some kind of distance or seeing, oh, I can have an impact, even if it hurts someone, now I can see that I've had this impact. And so I love the idea too of men or women out there in the world and going from this, this perspective of, self-focused, me, what's going on here? Is she going to hurt me? Does she want me? Does he love me? Am I attractive enough to, wow, what if I was actually out in the world with this lens or context of service?
Right.
What if I was here to actually see how can I brighten this person's day, or how can I have a positive impact versus I'm trying to get something here. And
from a leadership conversation, I mean, even as far back as sort of Confucius and Lao Tzu, you know, some of the ancient philosophers and spiritual teachers in Asia and the East, there's a lot of talk about, you've seen these, a good leader gets things done. A great leader makes people feel good. The superior leader is such that when the work is done, the people said we did it ourselves. Right? And so they recognized, 2,500, 3,000 years ago that great leadership is really an act of service where you are able to empower other people to the point where they did it themselves. And I think in relationship, there's much of that as well. There's so much. I mean, again, we are living from an intrinsic sense of an ego identity, which is about protection and self-preservation. So it's all about the self-centered experience. Mm-hmm. And the more we cling to the self-centered, self-serving way, the more we feed the ego and the more we feed our fear. Yeah. Right? And I think there's a reason why every spiritual tradition, I'm talking about, Eastern, Western, has a component of service. Yep. Right? In every tradition, there's a component of service because it's a direct path to going beyond the tiny egoic window of the world. Yeah. Yeah. There's a verse that we say at the end of the sitting blocks at the Zen Center. Mm-hmm. Can I share with you real quick? Because it's please. Main, right? I have to think about it. You know how when you're out of context, it's hard to recall.
It's hard to recall it.
I'm not sitting on the cushion. It says, caught in a self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. And I think, if we take that into relationship, not caught in a self-centered dream, experiencing the moment as it is, and when we're in this moment, compassion is a natural flow, right? Service is a natural flow. When I'm not stuck in my ego conversation and self-protection, then if I'm not self-centered, I'm life-centered. Right. And in life-centered, it's a natural flow to be nurturing, to be tending.
Right. And I think it shifts then from this way of this self-centered, okay, I need to prove something, or I need to get something, or have this expectation from this other person in front of me. And, oh, wow, okay. One of the questions that I love giving to my clients is that when they meet someone, they can really sit in this question of what is the highest good for this connection? Yeah. Is it that we're lovers? Is it that we are going to be partners? Is it that we are deep friends? Is it that we are going to grow each other in a certain way? Are we creative buddies? Who knows? But to enter in without that sense of, I have to make sure that I get something out of this, and really shift into what is the we? What is the we calling for? What is the what is going to be in service of everybody involved? I think that can be such a beautiful way to look at it.
And what that brings to me is, I start out by saying, life, as far as I'm concerned, life is about energy. Energy is life. Life is energy, right? Energy manifests into form, and then it deconstructs back into energy. And a relationship is a flow of energy. Right. When the energy doesn't flow back and forth, there is no relationship. There's just two objects. Right. And so I think entering into a relationship as an object means I'm going to have a very flat, static experience. If I enter into the relationship saying, how does energy flow back and forth, right? How do I give you energy and serve what you need? And how do I receive energy and get what I need? How do I flow? How do I transfer energy back and forth? Now we have a much bigger conversation and creating a container where there can be dynamism. And then you talk about things like passion or excitement or life force, right? But as long as I'm stuck in, I need to look good, you need to help me look good, I don't want to be vulnerable, I'm fearful, fix me, take care of me, please me. Yeah. That's pretty predictable, right? And very unsatisfying.
Yeah. Yeah, ultimately. And I know some people who haven't necessarily had a lot of love or sex or passion, that can seem, like, oh, if I could get some of that. But ultimately what I see is it really is not satisfying and not fulfilling for people.
Yeah, I think the question is, how can I create dynamic exchange? How can I be a conduit? How can I be of service? How can I, with my fears, with my insecurities, with my inadequacies, own that, accept that, embrace that, and step into a space that allows that to be what it is and is more.
Yes.
I at one point many years ago thought, I thought, I would enter into a relationship when I'm sort of perfected, when I'm ready.
Uh-huh.
Well, that I would still be single then, right? And then Shannon and I got married. We're like, well, I'll have children when I'm ready to have children. I would certainly still be childless. The act of entering into the experience is the revelation. I don't think there's revelation before the experience.
Yeah, and I keep bringing it back in a way, I think, to people who are single, because I think it's somehow easier in this context to look at when we're already in relationship. But even that same, like, oh, I'll go have a conversation, or I'll get online to date, or I'll do these things when I'm ready. And when I'm ready being, right, when I'm perfected, or when I'm not afraid anymore, or all of that. And I love, as much as I have 100 more questions I could ask you, I think it's such a beautiful place to end take one that we're doing, to really continue to be able to do it with the fear and with the vulnerability and all of that.
Yeah, because there's no other option.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no other option. If it has to be when the fear is gone, the vulnerability is not there, it will never happen.
Yeah.
Not as a human.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it's like to be in a relationship as a crab.
I was just going to say,
maybe I know at a deep level, but I can't recall. And I want to say sort of one last thing, just in terms of, it's difficult. There's a social, not just American, but sort of a human social stigma around sort of being single. And I think that could be a trip in and of itself, right? The shame of being single, or the somehow brokenness of being single, can in and of itself become a trap.
Yeah.
And so I would invite anyone to sort of, embrace that even relationship is still a place where you can have this dynamic exchange and still be single.
Right.
And that you can be single is simply just a state. It does not define a person. Yeah,
no, I also used to think, there's this pain of being single, and once you get into a relationship, then it kind of meets or heals or soothes that pain, and then realizing there's just so much pain being in relationship and trying to navigate being a human being with another human being. Like you said, it's one state versus another, and all of it, like you said before, I like to look at it as, can we see the moment as an opportunity presenting itself, and as the potential to have more connection and more love and giving and receiving. And it's funny, I actually was just going to look and see my email tagline is a Rilke quote, and it's, for one human being to love another, that is perhaps the most difficult of all our tasks.
Yeah.
Ultimate, the last test and proof, the work for which all other work is but preparation. And I mean, I see that. I think it's so true. It takes a lot, it's challenging.
Amen. It is. And I appreciate you seeing in my book some guidance and recipe to help people through that challenge. Because I still think, I talk a lot about the hero's journey, the heroic journey, the journey of leaving the known, leaving the comfort zone, going through challenge and risk and sacrifice, and finding the prize that you were seeking, and then sharing it with others. And I don't know that there's any more applicable experience than the experience of actually learning to love.
Yeah.
So
thank you so much for this. And I suggest getting yourself a copy of The 4 Virtues of a Leader for you listening. I listened actually to it on Audible. I love listening that way. And the interviews, Eric did an amazing interview with Tammy Simon from Sounds True. And that was one of the other things I wanted to talk about was, that you haven't had an inner critic voice for 20 years. And how the inner critic is something that holds so many of us back. And so, yeah, there's so many more things I could ask you. And I'm so grateful for everything we've covered today. And thank you for doing this work in the world.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for you doing yours and for inviting me to play with you for a while. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I hope we get to do it again.
Anytime.
Thanks.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.